everybody. What's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, your host here at Crimes Untold. And today we're going to be talking about the murder that influenced the movie Heavenly Creatures. So the movie Heavenly Creatures came out in 1994, and this is a New Zealand-based movie that's a biographical and psychological drama. So the basis of this movie is that a 13-year-old English girl befriends a 14-year-old girl from a working class family. So the 13-year-old is like an affluent girl, and then obviously befriends the working class girl. This is when the affluent child moves to the working class girl's school. They end up bonding over what they like, what they don't like. They end up having this extremely intense relationship in which they start talking about their fantasies and they start writing stories together, and they create this fantasy kingdom called Barovnia, in which the adventure novels they write together are based in this kingdom. Eventually, they had hoped that these novels would be published and eventually made into films in Hollywood. And over time, when they're creating these stories, it would be real to them in the real world. But one of the girls' parent figure wouldn't agree with what they were doing, how she would spend her time and all of this. And unfortunately, that's what sets up to the murder of this girl's mother, which indeed would be matricide. So if you don't know what I'm talking about Juliet Hulme and Pauline Parker, which this is mostly known as the Parker Hulme case, but it's the murder of Honora Riper. So Honora Riper is actually the mother of Pauline Parker. Yes, hence why this is matricide. Okay. Let's just talk about the day of. We'll get more into like their writing and shit, because it gets a little weird because of the type of relationship they have. Also, I'm sorry I look like a drowned rat because I just showered, and yeah, I wanted to record this for you guys, so you know. Yes. But anywho, so the day of the murder, Pauline was 16 and Juliet was 15 at the time. So this afternoon they went with Honora to Victoria Park, and they ended up eating at a tea kiosk that afternoon on the 22nd of June of 1954. So they ended up taking a stroll in the woods in the park after finishing their meal, and it's approximately about 430 yards away, or 430 feet away, from where they were eating to where Honora was bludgeoned to death with half of a brick that was covered by an old stocking. After they bludgeoned her, they threw the brick, and they ended up running back to the kiosk, and they saw the owners of the kiosk, and the owners are Agnes and Kenneth Ritchie, and the girls basically would just say that Honora fell and hit her head and something is seriously wrong with her. But when they found her body, it told a completely different story, and the whole ordeal about the accidental death fell apart. So Honora had minor injuries on her fingers, and she had major lacerations on her neck, face, and head. When the police started looking more into this, they found the murder weapon discarded in the woods nearby, so clearly she didn't fall and hit her head. And since they found this means, oh hey, there's holes in the story, something's not right with this. It was safe to assume that the girls had something to do with it. Obviously, they would search their homes, and this is when they would find the diaries that belonged to these girls, in which it showed their liking of storytelling and how they explained the entire scene. So after these girls were arrested, their trial was sensationalized. So there was speculation of insanity and lesbianism on the behalf of the girls, which kind of goes hand in hand with how they were in real life, because a lot of people around them assumed that they were in this type of a lesbian relationship, and because of how close they are, a lot of people just assumed things, which is kind of sad because, I mean, it's just two girls that are really close friends. But I understand it because Pauline would spend a ton of time at Juliet's house where she felt accepted because she felt that her mother just didn't understand her. Honora was apparently hostile towards her. They would fight all the time. The atmosphere at home was completely like angsty and angry, and there was no peace. But at the Holmes household, which is Juliet's house, Pauline had peace because there was such a difference in their lives. Juliet was able to talk to her parents about the things that she wanted to. It was very like they could have actual intellectual conversations instead of fighting with your parent. And this is basically what sends Pauline kind of in a downward spiral because, I mean, it's her mother that ends up dying. And then here comes Juliet kind of as like her savior to, or her saving grace to bring out all of what's in here that she wants to write down on paper and make it a reality. And part of that reality is the idea of what's called the fourth world, which is a heaven without Christians, where music is celebrated and the arts are celebrated as well. And Juliet ultimately believes that she would go there and she dies. Which, I mean, it's really cool, but it's kind of weird at the same time. Really weird at the same time. Also, I do want to kind of add into this that Juliet and Pauline had suffered from illnesses as children, which is another thing that they really found common grounds on. So Pauline had osteomyelitis and Juliet had tuberculosis. So osteomyelitis is infection of the bone, and it's most commonly found in children, specifically their feet, their hips, their spine, and their femur or humerus. And then obviously tuberculosis. Everybody should know what tuberculosis is. If you work in the medical field, you have to have a TB test in order to work somewhere. Make sure it is a negative TB test. Basically, tuberculosis affects your lungs, and it's a severe infection of bacteria on your lungs. This is what really started their connection as a friendship after Juliet moved to where Pauline lived, to Christchurch, and when Juliet started attending the Christchurch Girls High School, where Pauline was also a student. So they're basically, I kind of want to talk about their writings more, and because they do bring it up in the trial, kind of. So as their relationship intensified, obviously it caused Pauline's parents to think that they were engaging in a sexual relationship. And at that time, so this is the 1950s, specifically in New Zealand, homosexuality was considered a mental illness. It wasn't an actual like sexual orientation at the time. So this also was a concern of Juliet's parents. So both families continue to allow the girls to see each other. Pauline was accepted in Juliet's home for overnights and vacations, but here's the weird part. When Pauline wasn't with Juliet, Juliet would get ill and she would withdraw because she didn't have Pauline with her. So it's basically like there's a codependency there that is so you don't want to see. Yeah. So basically, from the outside looking in, or from me looking at this and reading about this now, you would assume that they basically were in a romantic relationship, but there was no sexual part of it. It was just they were deeply devoted companions that would be lost without each other, basically. So with their fourth world kind of ideology, they also would, like, that would be their own personal religion, and they would kind of rest on their own ideas of morality. They would worship their own saints in this parallel dimension, which is the fourth world, which is their own version of heaven. So this place was somewhere where they felt that they would be able to go occasionally, especially during times of spiritual enlightenment. Now, spiritual enlightenment, it basically is, it's hard to kind of say what spiritual enlightenment is because different religions say it as different things. it's kind of like an awakening. So, spiritual enlightenment is kind of like an awakening when it comes to yourself. You're having an outer body experience to really accept something to yourself. This is really like in spiritual enlightenment is more of like an Eastern religion type thing. It's not really westernized, except for if you are in AA, they talk about spiritual enlightenment, but that's a whole other thing. I'm not going to get into that because we're not here talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. We are here talking about the Parker Hulme Murder. So, yes. So with their religion, Pauline said that they achieved spiritual enlightenment because of their friendship. So their friendship was basically the basis of their spiritual enlightenment, and this is what made them better. The year before the murders in 1953, Pauline was not allowed to go to Juliet's like summer holidays. She wasn't allowed to go on the summer holidays, but she was the years before this. So this is where it was kind of weird. But this is because Juliet's parents separated, and well, basically what had happened is there was a lot of inner turmoil happening with Juliet's parents. They separated. Her mother had an affair. Her father had to resign from his position. And then Juliet's family ultimately were going to go back to England. But Juliet said Juliet was going to be sent to live with her family that was in South Africa because of her health. Obviously, both of these girls don't want this to happen. They were completely heartbroken. So Pauline decided that she was going to South Africa as well. They thought that Juliet agreed to this plan. However, Pauline was not allowed to go with Juliet. And this is when they started planning the murder of Pauline's mother in order to get the obstacle out of the way. Their plan was to go to South Africa and then go to either Hollywood or New York, where they wanted to in turn take their writings and publish them. This brings us to the day of the murder. So they basically had been planning it for months before this happened, but ultimately they would be arrested and they would be tried. So prior to the trial, Pauline was going by Pauline Ripert, but because her parents weren't married, she actually has to be called Pauline Parker, which is her mother's maiden name. Just a weird little odd note. I don't know if this is an all over the world thing if your parents are not married, where your child has to take your maiden name. They tried to do that with my second child because me and my husband weren't married at the time. Even though our oldest had his last name, I don't know, it was weird. So they tried, and no, I rectified that. But so Pauline had to go by Pauline Parker, hence why it's the Parker Hulme case. So obviously I mentioned this trial was completely sensationalized, especially with insanity and lesbianism. So both of them were convicted on the 20th of August of 1954. As they were too young for the death penalty, they got the maximum sentence, which was 5 years in prison. They both served their time. Juliet was at the Mount Eden prison in Auckland. There are some reports that say that they had to, when they were released after their 5 years, they were never allowed to contact each other. But there is also speculation that this was never a thing. Juliet's release, after her release, she went to be with her dad in Italy, and Pauline ended up being placed on a 6-month parole, and after her parole was up, she left the country. So following Pauline's release, she actually changed her name. Her name became Hilary Nathan, and she ended up living in New Zealand under surveillance before she was allowed to leave for England. And she ended up becoming a devout Roman Catholic, and she never spoke to any media, except for in 1996 when she ended up releasing a statement where she talked about how remorseful she was for killing her mom. And her sister even said that Pauline, yes, she committed a terrible crime 40 years ago, but she has spent 40 years repaying for her crime and doing what's best for her. and that she's super sorry about it. And it took her about the entire 5 years of her sentence to realize exactly what she did. So, following the release of Juliet, she spent time in Italy, England, and in the United States. And later, she would settle in Scotland, which this is the most ironic thing. She ended up becoming a historical novelist or historical detective novelist, and she sports the pen name Anne Perry. She also is a member of the Latter-day Saints, and she has been a member since 1968. So until 1994, nobody knew that Anne Perry was Juliet Hulme. In 2006, it was reported both of them said that while their relationship with the other was obsessive, they were not in a sexual relationship. So Juliet ended up dying just this year on the 10th of April of 2023, and she was 84 years old. So that, my friends, is the Parker Hulme murder case. I hope you guys learned something from this. I thought this was super cool because it's something that's so out of the ordinary because they're so clever, and it's so, yeah, it's cool. There's a lot of books, there's theater, there's films that have been created because of this murder, but I thought it was something interesting just to add to the July's Killer Kids. So I'll see you guys in my next one.